The stone walls of a converted Luxembourg chateau hold the morning cold like a tomb. January 4th, 1945. Outside, fresh snow covers the frozen ground where American tanks sit idle, their engines ticking as they cool. Inside, a single fire crackles in an enormous fireplace, the only source of warmth in a room that feels more like an interrogation chamber than a command center. General George S. Patton stands with his back to the door, warming his hands over the flames. His breath is visible in the frigid air. The pearl-handled pistols at his hips catch the firelight. At 60 years old, his face is lined and weathered, but his eyes remain sharp as broken glass. A major from the Inspector General's office enters, clutching a manila folder stamped Top Secret. His boots echo on the stone floor. He stops at attention, waiting for the general to acknowledge him. Patton doesn't turn around. The major clears his throat and places the folder on the massive oak desk between them. Inside that folder is everything needed to destroy the reputation of the United States Army, to hand Nazi propagandists their greatest weapon, and to send American soldiers to the gallows. What happens in the next 60 seconds will remain hidden for 70 years. They called him Old Blood and Guts, a nickname born from his philosophy that generals should lead from the front, that war was humanity's highest calling, that the clash of armies was a symphony composed by the gods themselves. George S. Patton was not like other generals. While Eisenhower commanded from headquarters and Bradley studied maps and safety, Patton rode in the lead tank. While Montgomery planned cautiously, Patton attacked recklessly. He believed speed was armor, that aggression was the only defense, that hesitation killed more men than enemy fire. By January 1945, he had proven himself the most successful field commander in the European theater. His Third Army had torn through France like a chainsaw through timber. They'd crushed German resistance at Metz. They'd performed the impossible just weeks earlier, relieving the besieged town of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, driving through a blizzard that grounded all air support, arriving exactly when Patton promised they would. The Germans feared him more than any other Allied commander. They called him Der Blutige General, the Bloody General, not because he was cruel, but because wherever Patton appeared, the fighting became ferocious beyond description. His own men worshipped him. He gave speeches before battle that would make your spine stiffen. He told them they were the greatest soldiers who ever lived. He told them that 30 years from now, they'd be glad they were in this fight. He told them to wade into the enemy and spill their blood. They believed every word, but on this frozen morning, the major standing in Patton's headquarters is about to test whether Old Blood and Guts truly stands with his men when the consequences become unbearable. The major expects immediate action. He expects courts-martial. He expects the legendary discipline of George Patton to come crashing down like a hammer on an anvil. The file contains sworn statements from multiple witnesses. It contains ballistic reports showing that victims were shot from behind execution style. It contains photographs of bodies frozen in Belgian snow. It contains a list of named officers and enlisted men of the 11th Armored Division. The charges are clear. Murder of prisoners of war. Under the Articles of War, the penalty is death by hanging. This isn't a handful of shell-shocked privates who lost control in combat. This is an organized execution of approximately 60 captured German soldiers, specifically members of the Waffen-SS. But to understand why this file exists, why American soldiers would commit such an act, and why Patton might protect them, you need to understand what happened 1 month earlier in the frozen forests of Belgium. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last desperate gamble, a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes. Forest designed to split the Allied armies and capture the port of Antwerp. The attack came during the coldest winter in 30 years, turning warfare into a frozen nightmare where men's fingers broke off from frostbite and rifle oil, froze solid dot at a snowy crossroads near Malmedy, Belgium. A convoy of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion ran directly into Kampfrupp Peiper, a ruthlessly efficient Waffensis Panzer unit commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Peiper. The Americans were outgunned and surrounded. They surrendered. So far, everything followed the Geneva Convention. The SS troopers disarmed them professionally and herded 120 American prisoners into a snow-covered field. The men stood in rows, hands raised, breath steaming in the bitter cold. Then the SS machine gunners opened fire. For 10 horrific minutes the snow turned crimson. 84 American prisoners of war fell dead. Some were killed instantly by machine gun fire. Others, wounded and screaming, were walked up to and shot in the head at point-blank range as they lay helpless. A handful of survivors played dead, letting the blood of their friends freeze onto their uniforms, lying motionless for hours until darkness fell. When they finally sprinted into the woods and reached American lines, their testimony didn't stay in briefing rooms. It exploded through the ranks of Patton's Third Army like a grenade. Malmedy. The word became a curse, a rallying cry, a permission slip written in blood. General George S. Patton addressed his officers after hearing the news. His voice was cold steel. "We're not just fighting Germans. We're fighting SS fanatics who murder prisoners. From now on, we fight fire with fire." Every general in the room understood exactly what he meant. Patton believed in total war. He'd once told reporters, "We're not just going to shoot the bastards. We're going to cut out their living guts and use them to grease the treads of our tanks." He meant every word. To old blood and guts. War was not a gentleman's game played by rules. It was kill or be killed. The SS had proven they would show no mercy. Therefore they deserved none. But even Patton couldn't control how his words would be interpreted by soldiers who had just lost friends to SS executioners, by men who were exhausted, frozen, and terrified, by young Americans who had come to Europe as liberators and were now learning that liberation required becoming something darker. The inhibition against killing prisoners was about to vanish completely. The village of Chenogne, Belgium, just miles from Bastogne, where Patton's Third Army had broken the German siege 6 days earlier. The fighting had been house to house, brutal, intimate. By mid-afternoon, elements of the 11th Armored Division had secured the village and captured approximately 60 German soldiers. Among the prisoners were men of the Waffen-SS, easily identifiable by their camouflage smocks and distinctive collar insignia. They had fought hard. But now they were disarmed, hands raised, standing in a snowy field. What happened next was not combat. It was not a firefight. It was methodical. An American machine gunner set up his tripod in the frozen mud. The ammunition belt was loaded with deliberate care. Officers stood nearby. Soldiers formed a loose perimeter. The order was given. The machine gun roared. 60 German prisoners were cut down in waves. Those who survived the initial burst were finished with M1 Garand rifles. Some tried to run. They were shot in the back, the snow turned red. The killing took less than 5 minutes. It was a mass execution carried out by boys from Ohio and Texas and New York, the same boys who had come to Europe to fight for freedom, to uphold American values, to be different from the enemy. Malmedy had been answered with Chenogne. The cycle of vengeance had rotated full circle, but you cannot hide 60 bodies forever. Belgian civilians watched from their windows. Other American officers saw the aftermath. Within hours, rumors reached Rear Echelon Command. By January 2nd, the Inspector General's office launched a formal inquiry. The investigators moved quickly. Within 48 hours, they had collected sworn statements from witnesses. They had testimony from Belgian villagers who described the execution in chilling detail. They had ballistic reports showing the Germans were shot from behind execution style. They had photographs of bodies frozen in the snow. The investigation file grew thick with undeniable evidence. It named the unit 11th Armored Division. It named specific officers and sergeants. It outlined charges that under military law carried mandatory penalties, including death by hanging for murder of prisoners of war. This wasn't just a legal problem. It was a propaganda catastrophe waiting to happen. If this went to trial, Joseph Goebbels would have a field day. Nazi radio would scream, "See, the Americans are the true murderers. They execute prisoners just like they accuse us of doing." It would validate every piece of Nazi propaganda claiming the United States had no moral authority. It would prove that American soldiers under General Patton's command were capable of the same atrocities as the SS. More importantly, it would break the spirit of the very divisions Patton needed for the final push into Germany. The file moved up the chain of command, stamp by stamp, signature by signature, until on January 4th, 1945, it landed on the desk of the man they called Old Blood and Guts. Back in that stone room, the silence is crushing. Patton picks up the file. He feels its weight. Hundreds of pages of testimony, evidence, photographs. He doesn't open it. Instead, he looks at the major with those legendary steel blue eyes that have stared down German panzers and intimidated subordinate generals. What is the nature of these allegations? Patton's voice is dangerously calm. The major swallows hard. The killing of prisoners, General. Approximately 60 German soldiers of the Waffen-SS executed after surrender by elements of the 11th Armored Division near Chenogne. Patton nods slowly. His jaw tightens. When did this supposedly occur? January 1st, General. New Year's Day. 4 days after we relieved Bastogne, Patton says quietly. 4 days after my men fought through a blizzard to save 10,000 surrounded troops. 4 days after the 11th Armored helped break the German offensive. The major doesn't respond. He knows where this is going. George says Patton walks slowly toward the fireplace. The orange glow illuminates the deep lines in his face, the face of a man who has sent thousands to their deaths, who has made impossible decisions, who has never apologized for being a warrior. He looks at the top secret stamp one last time. Then he delivers a verdict that will never appear in any official record. There are no murderers in this army, Major. Patton's voice is like gravel grinding. And I will not have my men prosecuted for killing the sons of bitches who massacred our boys at Malmedy. With a flick of his wrist casual, dismissive General George S. Patton tosses the investigation file into the roaring fire. The paper curls instantly. The dry pages catch flame, turning brown, then black. The typed words blur and disappear. The photographs of bodies in the snow crackle and shrivel. The names of the accused soldiers vanish. The testimony of Belgian witnesses becomes ash. The ballistic reports showing execution-style killings dissolve into smoke. Justice for 60 German soldiers goes up the chimney in a wisp of gray smoke. Old Blood and Guts stands there, hands clasped behind his back, watching it burn with the same intensity he watches enemy positions through binoculars. He's challenging the major to say a single word, to object, to protest. The major stands frozen. He's a creature of rules and regulations, a man who has spent his career ensuring the army follows the law. And he has just watched the highest-ranking officer in the theater commit a felony obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, accessory after the fact to murder. The silence is crushing. The major realizes his choice. Speak up and end his career, possibly face court-martial for insubordination, or walk out and become complicit in burying a war crime. He salutes. It's stiff, mechanical. Patton doesn't return it immediately. He's still watching the last pages curl into ash. Finally, slowly, almost dismissively, Old Blood and Guts raises his hand to his helmet. That will be all, Major. The major turns and walks out, closing the heavy oak door softly behind him. His hands are shaking in the hallway. He leans against the stone wall and takes a deep breath. He knows what he just witnessed. Outside these walls, the United States is fighting for democracy, for freedom, for the rule of law. But inside that room, the law just died in flames. Why did General George S. Patton, a man who once slapped a shell-shocked soldier for cowardice, who demanded absolute discipline, who court-martialed officers for the smallest infractions, protect soldiers who committed cold-blooded murder? The answer reveals who Patton really was. Old Blood and Guts wasn't a policeman in uniform. He wasn't interested in legal exercises. He was a warrior who believed war was a primal struggle for survival, that the battlefield wasn't a courtroom, but an arena where only the strong survived. Patton knew the 11th Armored Division was about to be thrown back into combat. They'd be attacking fortified German positions, fighting SS fanatics who would give no quarter. He needed them aggressive. He needed them lethal. He needed them to believe their commander had their backs no matter what. If he court-martialed the men responsible for Chenogne, he believed it would break the division's spirit. It would send a message to every soldier in Third Army. Your general cares more about dead Germans than living Americans. Fight aggressively at your own legal risk. Patton couldn't accept that message. Furthermore, he held a visceral hatred for the Waffen-SS. After Malmedy, he dehumanized them completely. They weren't soldiers entitled to Geneva Convention protection. They were rabid dogs that needed to be put down. In his calculus, erasing the Chenogne Massacre wasn't a crime. It was a necessary command decision to preserve his army's fighting spirit. To Old Blood and Guts, dead SS soldiers didn't deserve justice. They deserved exactly what they got. The immediate consequences rippled through Third Army. Like electricity. The officers of the 11th Armored Division were not arrested. No military police showed up. The investigation simply vanished as if it had never existed. The soldiers returned to their tanks. They loaded shells, checked gun sights, and rolled back toward Germany. But a message had been sent loud and clear. The old man has our backs. Kill the SS. Don't take prisoners. We'll never be punished. For the rest of the campaign into Germany, fighting in Third Army sectors was particularly savage. Prisoners were rarely taken in combat with SS units. When Waffen-SS soldiers tried to surrender, they were often told to keep running, then shot in the back. The brutal efficiency of Patton's divisions increased. They fought with reckless desperation, knowing they were untouchable, but the moral cost was corrosive. Young men who came to Europe as liberators had been given a pass to be executioners. The stain of Chenogne didn't wash off. It settled deep into the psyche of soldiers who were there, who knew what happened, who understood that justice had burned in a Luxembourg fireplace. For 70 years, history reflected what George S. Patton burned. The Malmedy Massacre became one of World War II's most famous atrocities. It was prosecuted extensively at the Dachau War Crimes Trials. Joachim Peiper and dozens of his SS soldiers were convicted. Some were hanged. Others served long prison sentences. The world knew about Malmedy. It became a symbol of Nazi barbarity. But Chenogne? Chenogne vanished. It became a ghost story whispered by veterans at reunions, but never spoken publicly. There were no trials, no hangings. The 11th Armored Division went down in history as heroes of the Battle of the Bulge. Their dark secret was buried in the ashes of a Luxembourg fireplace, protected by the legend of old blood and guts. It wasn't until the 1990s, when classified archives were finally opened and old soldiers began speaking before they died, that historians started piecing together what really happened. Belgian witnesses gave interviews. American veterans admitted what they'd seen. The physical evidence had been destroyed by Patton, but memory couldn't be erased. Today, military historians debate Patton's decision endlessly. Was he protecting his soldiers or protecting himself? Was he a pragmatic commander making a tough wartime decision, or was he an accomplice to murder? The U.S. Army War College now teaches the Chenogne incident, though it took decades to enter the curriculum. Officers study it as a case in ethics of command. The question posed to young officers is always the same. What would you have done in Patton's position? There's never an easy answer. What we know for certain is this: old blood and guts chose his men over the law. He saved soldiers from the hangman's noose. He preserved his army's fighting spirit. He won battles and advanced the liberation of Europe. But he couldn't save those soldiers from their nightmares. The fire destroyed the paper trail, but it couldn't burn memories from the minds of men who pulled triggers in Belgian snow. Many carried that weight for the rest of their lives, never speaking of it except in final years, confessing to chaplains and historians what they'd done and what their legendary general helped them escape. George S. Patton himself never spoke publicly about Chenogne. His diary entries from that period are carefully edited, avoiding any mention of the investigation. After the war, in the brief period before his death in December 1945 from injuries in a car accident, he gave numerous interviews. He talked about strategy, about tank warfare, about his rivalry with Montgomery. Never about burning an investigation file. Did he regret it? We'll never know. Old blood and guts was not a man given to public self-doubt. He believed until his dying day that he'd fought the war the only way it could be fought, with absolute aggression, total commitment, and unwavering support for his soldiers. The line between hero and war criminal is sometimes just a matter of which side wins. If Germany had won, George S. Patton would likely have been prosecuted for the same crimes he protected his soldiers from. If the United States had lost, Chenogne would have been exhibited as proof of American barbarity. Instead, America won. Patton became a legend. The men of the 11th Armored Division went home to parades and medals. And the dark secret stayed buried for generations. We like to remember Patton as the pearl pistol-wearing warrior poet who raced across France and saved Bastogne. We want him to be the uncomplicated hero who proved American fighting spirit could overcome any obstacle. But the truth is always more complicated than the legend. George S. Patton was brilliant. He was brave. He was the greatest tank commander in military history. His aggressive tactics saved countless American lives by ending the war faster. He was also willing to burn evidence of a war crime to protect his soldiers and preserve their killing edge. He chose military effectiveness over justice. He chose victory over morality. And in making that choice, he forced us to ask an uncomfortable question. Was he right? That question has no easy answer. It depends on whether you believe the law should apply equally in wartime, or whether war creates conditions where survival trumps justice. It depends on whether you think 60 dead SS soldiers, members of an organization that committed countless atrocities, deserve the same legal protection as innocent civilians. It depends on whether you believe a general's first duty is to the abstract concept of justice or to the concrete reality of his soldiers' lives. General George S. Patton answered that question on January 4th, 1945, when he tossed an investigation file into a fireplace and watched it burn. He chose his men. He chose victory. He chose to be remembered as old blood and guts, the warrior who never apologized, never retreated, never let legal niceties interfere with winning battles. The soldiers of the 11th Armored Division went on to help liberate concentration camps. They saw the gas chambers at Mauthausen. They saw the mass graves. They saw what the SS had really been fighting for. Some said Chenogne made more sense after they saw those camps. Others carried the guilt to their graves, understanding that becoming like the enemy, even for a moment, meant losing something essential. As for old blood and guts, he never apologized. He never second-guessed. He died believing he'd done his duty, which was to win the war by any means necessary and bring as many of his soldiers home alive as possible. History will debate George S. Patton forever, but one thing is certain. On that frozen morning in Luxembourg, he made a choice that defined his legacy. He burned the evidence. He protected the killers. He chose war over law. And in doing so, he proved that even the greatest heroes are capable of the darkest compromises. The fire in that Luxembourg chateau destroyed the official record, but it couldn't destroy the truth. The truth is that victory in war, even a just war against evil, comes at a cost we rarely acknowledge. Sometimes that cost is measured in the bodies of enemy prisoners lying in snow. Sometimes it's measured in the corruption of justice. And sometimes it's measured in the knowledge that the heroes we worship are also the men who hold the match. This is the story they don't teach in school. This is the legend behind the legend. This is what General George S. Patton did when he found out his soldiers executed 60 SS guards. He made sure no one would ever know. Until now. War is hell. But sometimes the men who win wars become demons to do it.